Today we're going to show you how to change the door boot seal on your front load washer, and it's a really easy job. All we're going to need is a Phillips screwdriver, a pair of needle nose pliers, a small flat blade screwdriver, and a 7mm nut driver if you have one. Let me show you how we do that. Now before we begin this repair, we will need to disconnect power to the washer, so simply pull the plug from the receptacle. And next we're going to remove the back of the control panel. There's 3 Phillips screws that hold it in position. And we can just roll that back and unsnap it from the back of the control panel, and we'll set that aside. Next we'll need to remove 3 screws that are across the back of the top panel, and using a 7mm nut driver we'll pull those screws out, and then we can just pull that panel back about an inch, and we can lift it up and then set it back out of the way. That gives us access to the screws that secure the console to the cabinet. Now our next step will be to remove the soap dispenser, so just pull it out and then reach in and depress the tab that holds it in position, and then slide it out. We can then remove a single Phillips screw to the left of that soap box, and then 2 screws on the top, one on either corner. And then we can lift that control panel away. There are some tabs that hold it in position, so you need to pry it a little bit, just not be too aggressive. And there are 2 tabs that go through the back plate on that control panel. We need to depress those to unlock it. Then we can just roll that panel up and out of the way. Now that will give us access to the 2 screws on top of the front panel. And we also need to remove the 3 screws across the bottom of the lower access panel. Our next step will be to open the door and remove the screws that secure the door latch assembly to the front panel. There's 3 Phillips screws that we need to remove. And next we need to remove the band clamp around the front of the door boot. So with a pair of needle nose pliers, if you look right at the very bottom, you'll see a spring with a hook on each end of it. So we can grab hold of that wire and then stretch that spring enough that we can roll the clamp out of the groove in the door bellows or door boot, and then remove it. Now we can roll the bellows away from the front panel and just tuck it into the opening so that it's completely detached. Next we'll remove the 4 screws that secure that front panel to the cabinet. We'll take the top 2 out first, and then while supporting the weight of the front panel, we'll remove the bottom 2 screws. Now we can lift the front panel up and away. There are 2 locating pins on the bottom that support that, as well as a couple of hooks on the top that fit into these slotted openings. So we can now set that aside. Now with the front panel off, we're next going to remove the water inlet pipe from the bellows. We'll simply roll that door bellows off of the end of that inlet pipe. And then next we need to remove the tube from the vent at the top. So while grasping the plastic portion of that vent, we're just going to work that hose off. And if need be, take a small flat blade screwdriver and just loosen it a bit without damaging it. And then we can remove the little vent, pulling the flat plastic washer off the top, and it's held with a couple of little protrusions on the side of that, and then just push it down through the opening. We'll need to reuse this, so hang on to it. And you'll note that there is a little point on one end that will face forward when we put it in the new bellows. Next, we need to remove that screw that tightens the clamp to hold the bellows to the tub. Well, first we can move that door latch out of the way and just tuck it in back so that it's not in our way. And then with a Phillips screwdriver, first of all, take note of how tight that clamp is, and then we're just going to loosen it enough that we can remove it. Now with a pair of needle nose pliers, just grab one end of that loop on the end of the clamp, and just separate it a little bit to loosen it. And with a flat blade screwdriver, just go in underneath of it and roll the clamp away from the tub. And then you can peel the whole door bellows completely off. And if this inlet pipe is in the way, just a friction fit up in the soap box, so you can actually twist that off of there just carefully and set it aside. Now next we'll want to make sure that the groove that that bellows is going to fit into is nice and clean. There's no soap debris in it. And we can also take and clean some of the crud that may be in the drain openings at the bottom. Now when installing the new bellows, we'll want to make sure that the inlet pipe opening is in about the 11 o'clock position, so that we have the vent opening right on the top, and there is a little locating tab right on that bellows that will line up with a corresponding notch on the outer tub. And what we need to do is make sure that this portion of the bellows sits into that groove in here. So we'll start at the top. And just carefully fit that in temporarily, and then we can work our way around the bellows, fitting it in as we go. You will find it easier if you work from both the inside and outside of the bellows at the same time. And just check periodically to make sure that we haven't got it off center. Next, we can put the clamp back in position. So just take that ring, fit it all the way around, and make sure that it goes into the groove. We want to try to end up with the screw portion of that right in here. And it's easier to turn this with it out of the groove than with it in there. So check it periodically to make sure we have it in the proper position. Loosen it as much as you need to get that extra length. Now again, we'll check and make sure that the boot hasn't moved. And the clamp is lined up where it should be. Keeping in mind that we will be tightening it, so if you need to position it, now's the time to do it. All right, next we'll retighten that clamp. Now when working with this clamp, you'll note that the nut that screw fits into had a long protrusion sticking from one side of it. It needs to fit into the loop of that wire ring, and it will probably pop in as you're tightening the screw. That keeps the nut from turning on you. You'll also note there may have been some thread locking paint on that screw, and that'll also give you an indication of how tight that clamp needs to be. Now once we have that clamp tight enough, make sure that we have no twists in it. We can next reinstall the vent on the top, and you'll note that there is a little notch there that matches the vent, so push that through the opening. And then line it up and put the little retaining clip on the top, snap that into position, and you can wet that nipple there just enough that the hose will slide on easier. Next we'll reinstall the inlet pipe, and again it's going to fit over a rubber grommet, so So we can moisten that grommet or the inside of the pipe. And then with the twisting motion, make sure that it bottoms out against the little stop that is on the bottom of the soap box. Rotate it around until it lines up with the opening. And then we'll fit that bellows completely over it. And pull it up into position so that it's tight up against the two little stops. Make sure it's snug all the way around. We'll drop that door latch back out where we can access it, and we're ready to put the front panel on. So we'll engage these two slotted openings with the hooks on the top, and that will allow it to hang in place. And then we can reach inside and pull the door latch assembly into position afterwards. Now with it in position, we'll put two screws in on the top just to secure it, and then we can reach inside and position the door latch. Just pull that bellows aside, and then we can reach in and line up the door latch, and then replace the 3 Phillips screws. As we're tightening these screws, we need to make sure that the door switch fits in the center of that opening so it doesn't bind. Then we can tighten those screws. Now we can put the 2 bottom screws in, and we can tighten those and tighten the top ones as well. Now we'll open the door again. We're going to make sure that the groove in that front panel that the bellows is going to fit into is clean and free of any debris. Now we can pull that bellows out through that opening. And once we've got it completely pulled through, just take note that there is a folded edge there that's going to fit down into that groove, and then just fit it in all the way around. Take care that we don't get any twists in that bellows. Now when it's properly in position, there should be a lip that lays right up against the front panel, and then a groove in front of that for our wire clamp to fit into. So we'll position that wire clamp so that the spring will be on the bottom. And we can just start it somewhere near the top, and then fit it into that groove, far around as we can get it. And then with our needle nose pliers, we're just going to grasp the very end of that wire band where it connects to the spring. We're going to pull it towards us so that we stretch the spring and keep it in tight to the front panel. And then we can just rotate that wire into the groove. Check to make sure we didn't put any twists in it. And now we can put the lower access panel on and the control panel. So we'll fit that lower access panel in underneath the bottom lip of the front panel. Make sure it fits up nice and tight. And then we'll put the center screw in first, and then the 2 outside screws. Now with those replaced, we can tilt the machine back just enough to pull those temporary blocks out. Now we can put the control panel back in place. Now when installing the control panel, we'll need to make sure that we have this locking tab on the bottom lined up in that rectangular slot. There's a locating pin right beside it, and then another locking tab over on the right hand side. We also need to make sure that we engage these 4 tabs across the top into the rectangular openings on the top of that metal frame. So we'll hook those in first, across the top. We'll rotate it down into position, press it in so that those 2 tabs lock, and then we'll replace the 1 Phillips screw next to the soap box, And we can replace the soap box. Line up the 2 rails with the appropriate sides. Check to make sure it locks. And then we can replace the top panel and the rear cover. So we'll next put the 2 screws in on the top of the control panel housing. That'll secure it to the cabinet. And then we'll slide the front panel into position, lift it up over that lip on that control panel housing until it sits flat. And there are some keyhole slots that will lock that into position as we push it forward. And we can replace the 3 screws across the back. And then the trim piece behind the control panel. And again, there are some little locking tabs that will hook into 3 rectangular openings in the main top. So we need to make sure that those engage. And also there are 4 little tabs across the top that will engage in the back of the control panel. So hook them into the top panel first. And then press it into the back of the control panel. Install the 3 screws. We can now push the washer back into position. We'll reconnect the power, and our repair is complete.